Late at night in Ouagadougou, when most families were already asleep, a familiar but unsettling image returned to television screens across Burkina Faso. A government minister, a serious tone, and words that carried weight far beyond the studio lights. The message was stark: an assassination plot against President Ibrahim Traoré had been uncovered, yet another attempt to remove him, not through elections or debate, but through violence. Even more alarming was the claim that the plan was allegedly financed from outside the country, with fingers pointed directly at neighboring Ivory Coast. For many Americans watching from afar, this may sound like just another African political crisis, another headline, another distant conflict. But for those who have followed Africa for decades through the Cold War, the post-colonial struggles, and the long search for stability, this moment feels different. It feels heavier, more fragile. President Traoré is not an ordinary leader. In just 3 years, he has survived multiple coup attempts while cutting ties with traditional Western partners, withdrawing from regional blocs, and aligning his country with new power centers. To some Africans, he represents resistance and self-determination. To others, he is a dangerous disruptor in an already volatile region. And now, once again, his life and the future of his country are reportedly at risk. What does it mean when a sitting head of state must constantly look over his shoulder? What does it say about a region when political disagreements spill into alleged cross-border plots and whispered accusations? And more importantly, for viewers in the United States, what role does the global order play when African nations choose paths that challenge long-standing alliances? Tonight's story is not about sports rivalries or diplomatic soundbites. It is about power survival and a continent standing at a crossroads. The questions raised here go beyond Burkina Faso. They speak to Africa's struggle for sovereignty and to whether the world is prepared to accept African leaders who refuse to follow familiar scripts. Please share this video if you believe stories like this deserve more than a passing headline. Subscribe if you think understanding Africa matters more now than ever. And leave a comment below. Do you believe President Ibrahim Traoré's path is protecting his nation or pushing it closer to the edge? The announcement did not come during daylight hours, nor was it delivered as a routine press briefing. It came late at night through a televised address that immediately signaled urgency. Burkina Faso's Minister of National Security appeared before the nation to deliver a message few countries ever want to hear: an alleged plot to overthrow the state and assassinate its president had been uncovered. According to the minister, intelligence services in Burkina Faso had detected what he described as a coordinated plan aimed at removing President Ibrahim Traoré from office. This was not presented as a vague threat or a rumor circulating on social media. It was framed as a concrete operation involving preparations for targeted killings, beginning with the president himself, followed by attacks on key state institutions. The gravity of the accusation deepened as the speech continued. Authorities claimed that the plot was not confined within Burkina Faso's borders. Instead, it was allegedly conceived, organized, and financed from abroad, specifically from neighboring Ivory Coast. The minister referenced intelligence findings and pointed to what he described as a leaked video, suggesting that evidence existed linking exiled political figures to the plan. One name was repeatedly implied, though not formally expanded upon: a former transitional president now living in exile. According to the government's account, this individual was allegedly central to coordinating the operation. While details about command structures, timelines, or specific tactics were not fully disclosed, the implication was unmistakable. This was presented as an externally supported attempt to violently reshape Burkina Faso's leadership. Several arrests, officials said, had already been made. Suspects believed to be connected to the alleged plot were taken into custody as investigations unfolded. Yet, despite the severity of the claims, many questions were left unanswered. How advanced was the plan? How close did it come to being executed? And how extensive was the network behind it? What made the situation even more delicate was the immediate regional implication. Ivory Coast, named directly in the broadcast as the alleged staging and financing ground, had not issued any official response at the time of the report. The silence was notable not as proof of guilt, but as a reminder of how quickly mistrust can harden when accusations cross national borders. This moment did not emerge in isolation. It arrived against the backdrop of an already tense relationship between Burkina Faso and several of its neighbors. In recent years, Ouagadougou has accused external actors of meddling in its internal affairs, particularly as the country reoriented its foreign policy away from traditional Western alliances. The government's message suggested that this alleged plot was part of a broader pattern, one in which Burkina Faso's political direction has made it a target. For ordinary citizens, the broadcast carried an unmistakable emotional weight. Even without gunfire in the streets or visible chaos, the idea that the head of state could be marked for assassination reinforced a lingering sense of vulnerability. It reminded viewers that political instability in the Sahel is not abstract. It reaches into homes, disrupts routines, and sustains an atmosphere of uncertainty that never fully fades. Importantly, the government's tone remained controlled. There was no call for public retaliation, no immediate escalation. Instead, the address emphasized vigilance, national security, and the role of intelligence services in preventing what was described as a catastrophic outcome. The message was clear: the state had survived another threat, but only narrowly. As the broadcast ended, one reality stood out. Whether fully proven or still unfolding, the allegation alone was enough to strain diplomatic ties, unsettle the population, and deepen the sense that Burkina Faso's current political path is being contested not only at home, but beyond its borders. As the shock of the late-night announcement settled, attention quickly shifted from the allegation itself to what it revealed about the precarious position of President Ibrahim Traoré. This was not described as an isolated incident. It was framed as part of a pattern, one that has followed him almost continuously since he came to power. In less than 3 years at the helm of Burkina Faso, Traoré has reportedly survived at least 3 attempted coups or destabilization efforts. Few modern leaders anywhere in the world govern under such persistent threat. Each allegation adds another layer of tension, reinforcing the image of a presidency balanced on what one analyst described as a knife's edge. The government's message emphasized this context carefully. Officials reminded the public that the country's political course has dramatically shifted in a short period of time. Burkina Faso has distanced itself from several former Western partners, withdrawn from regional arrangements it once depended on, and joined forces with neighboring military-led governments in Mali and Niger. Together they formed what is now known as the Alliance of Sahel States, a move that openly challenged the existing regional order. That decision alone reshaped how Traoré is perceived. Among many Africans, especially younger generations, and those critical of foreign influence, he has become a symbol of defiance, someone willing to say no to pressure from abroad. His speeches against imperialism and external interference resonate widely on social media and across parts of the continent. Supporters see him as a leader trying to reclaim sovereignty in a region long defined by dependency. But admiration and hostility often grow side by side. For neighboring governments and international actors invested in stability through familiar structures, Traoré represents uncertainty. His alignment away from traditional partners and toward alternative global powers has unsettled long-standing diplomatic balances. In that environment, every security scare is interpreted not just as a domestic threat, but as a signal flare in a broader geopolitical struggle. Reactions across West Africa reflected this divide. While no immediate official statements came from Ivory Coast, the accusation alone was enough to raise alarm. Alleging that a neighboring state financed an assassination plot is among the most serious charges one government can make against another. Even unproven, such claims harden public opinion and complicate diplomacy almost instantly. Beyond the region, the response was more muted, but no less significant. Western governments did not rush to comment publicly. There were no emergency statements from Washington or European capitals, yet silence itself carries meaning. For observers familiar with international politics, the lack of immediate reaction suggested caution, a desire to avoid inflaming tensions while closely watching how the situation unfolds. Inside Burkina Faso, the emotional reaction was quieter but deeper. There were no mass demonstrations or visible unrest following the announcement. Instead, there was a sense of weary recognition. Many citizens have grown accustomed to hearing of plots, threats, and enemies, both internal and external. The absence of panic did not signal calm, it signaled fatigue. At the same time, the government's handling of the announcement appeared deliberate. There was no declaration of emergency rule, no sweeping curfews, no public call to confront perceived enemies. The message emphasized control, intelligence, capability, and prevention. Officials wanted the public to believe the state was still firmly in charge. Yet, the underlying tension remained. Burkina Faso continues to face severe security challenges from jihadist groups controlling large swaths of territory. Resources are stretched thin. Every internal political crisis, real or alleged risks, weakening the focus on that ongoing threat. In this context, the alleged assassination plot became more than a security story. It became a moment of reckoning, forcing citizens, neighbors, and the international community to confront a difficult question: how long can a country under constant pressure maintain stability without compromise? As reactions echoed quietly across borders, one thing was clear. The story was no longer just about what happened over a single weekend. It was about the cumulative weight of decisions, alliances, and risks that have placed Burkina Faso and its president at the center of a regional storm. Beyond the accusations, the televised statements, and the geopolitical speculation, the real consequences of this crisis unfold quietly in the daily lives of ordinary people. For civilians in Burkina Faso, political instability is not an abstract concept debated by diplomats. It is something felt in disrupted routines, lingering fear, and an unspoken sense that the future remains uncertain. Each new report of a foiled coup or assassination plot reinforces a climate of psychological strain. Parents wonder whether schools will remain open. Shop owners question whether markets will be safe. Farmers and traders already struggling with insecurity from armed groups must now contend with the added anxiety that political violence could erupt at any moment. Even when streets remain calm, the tension lingers beneath the surface. Politically, the allegations have deepened existing fractures within the region. Relations between Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast were already complicated by differing political paths and security priorities. Publicly accusing a neighboring state of financing an assassination attempt pushes those tensions into far more dangerous territory. Trust, once damaged at this level, is not easily restored. For regional diplomacy, this moment is particularly sensitive. West Africa has spent years trying, often unsuccessfully, to balance sovereignty, cooperation, and stability. Accusations of cross-border interference undermine that fragile balance. Even without immediate retaliation or diplomatic fallout, the long-term effect is suspicion. Borders become more tightly watched. Intelligence services grow more guarded. Cooperation on shared threats, including terrorism and organized crime, becomes harder to sustain. Internally, the political consequences are equally complex. President Ibrahim Traoré continues to enjoy visible support from segments of the population who see him as standing up to external pressure. For these supporters, the alleged plot reinforces a familiar narrative that forces threatened by Burkina Faso's new direction are working to reverse it by any means necessary. Yet there are others who quietly worry about the cost of constant confrontation. Every accusation, every rupture with neighbors or institutions risks isolating the country further. Isolation can limit trade, reduce diplomatic options, and complicate efforts to stabilize an already fragile economy. For citizens caught in the middle, the question becomes painfully practical. Does defiance bring security or more danger? Another consequence lies in governance itself. When leaders govern under constant threat, priorities inevitably shift. Security concerns begin to dominate decision-making. Civil reforms, economic planning, and social programs can be delayed or sidelined. The risk is not authoritarian intent, but necessity. When survival becomes the overriding goal, long-term development often suffers. The broader region feels these effects as well. Burkina Faso's break from familiar regional structures has already reshaped political alignments in the Sahel. Each new crisis accelerates that shift, pushing countries to choose sides formally or informally. What emerges is not a unified West Africa, but a patchwork of alliances defined by fear, loyalty, and strategic calculation. Perhaps most troubling is the normalization of instability. When multiple coup attempts become part of the political background, societies risk adapting to a state of permanent uncertainty. That adaptation is costly. It dulls hope, discourages investment, and erodes the belief that peaceful political processes can prevail. The alleged assassination plot, whether fully substantiated or still unfolding, has already left its mark. It has deepened mistrust, strained regional relationships, and reminded civilians that political power struggles often come with human consequences. Long after the headlines fade, those consequences remain felt not in speeches or statements, but in the quiet calculations of everyday life. From Washington and other global capitals, the situation in Burkina Faso is being watched carefully but cautiously. There have been no dramatic press conferences, no urgent condemnations, and no sweeping declarations of support or concern. Instead, there is restraint. And in international politics, restraint often speaks louder than words. For the United States, Burkina Faso occupies a complex place on the strategic map. For years, Washington worked closely with governments across the Sahel on counterterrorism, intelligence sharing, and regional stability. That framework assumed partnership through familiar institutions and predictable alliances. President Ibrahim Traoré has disrupted that model. Since coming to power, Traoré has openly criticized Western influence-reduced cooperation with traditional partners and embraced a different vision of sovereignty. From an American policy standpoint, this creates uncertainty. The concern is not simply ideological disagreement, but operational risk: how to address terrorism, migration pressures, and regional instability when long-standing channels of cooperation are no longer reliable. Yet Washington's silence following the assassination allegations is also deliberate. Publicly taking sides, especially in an unverified cross-border accusation, could inflame tensions and reduce diplomatic leverage. Instead, the United States appears to be waiting, gathering information, and assessing whether this crisis will escalate or remain contained. At the same time, American policy toward Africa has been tightening in quieter ways. One example highlighted in the same news cycle is the expansion of visa bond requirements affecting dozens of countries, many of them African. For citizens of Nigeria, Angola, Ivory Coast, and others, the prospect of posting up to $15,000 to secure a short-term U.S. visa represents more than a bureaucratic hurdle. It signals distance, caution, a shift in tone. To many African observers, these policies feel connected. On one hand, leaders like Traoré challenge Western political norms. On the other, Western governments respond not with confrontation, but with recalibration, less engagement, stricter controls, fewer assumptions of partnership. Neither side announces a rupture, but the space between them quietly widens. Beyond the United States, other global actors are reading the moment differently. Russia and China, often mentioned in discussions of Burkina Faso's new orientation, present themselves as alternatives to conditional partnerships. Their interest is not purely ideological, it is strategic. Access, influence, and alignment matter in a world increasingly defined by competition rather than consensus. For Europe, particularly former colonial powers, the situation is uncomfortable. Instability in the Sahel has direct consequences for migration, security, and economic ties. Yet openly opposing leaders who enjoy domestic support risks reinforcing narratives of interference, narratives that figures like Traoré have used effectively. For American viewers, especially those who remember earlier eras of global rivalry, the pattern may feel familiar: regions caught between power centers, leaders navigating dangerous ground, external actors choosing between engagement and distance. The details change, but the structure remains. The alleged assassination plot in Burkina Faso is therefore not just a local crisis. It is a test case. It asks whether African countries can redefine their place in the world without triggering isolation or instability. And it challenges global powers, including the United States, to decide whether influence is best preserved through pressure, patience, or restraint. As the immediate shock of the allegations begins to fade, what remains is a deeper and more troubling reality. The story unfolding in Burkina Faso is not just about a single alleged assassination plot or a weekend of political tension. It is a warning about what happens when nations attempt to redefine their place in a world that is increasingly unforgiving of uncertainty. President Ibrahim Traoré stands at the center of this moment, not only as a man facing repeated threats, but as a symbol of a broader African dilemma. Across the continent, leaders and citizens alike are asking difficult questions. Can sovereignty be reclaimed without inviting destabilization? Can old alliances be rejected without creating new vulnerabilities? And can security be maintained when political paths diverge from established global expectations? For Burkina Faso, the danger is not only external. The normalization of crisis carries its own cost. When assassination plots, coup rumors, and emergency broadcasts become familiar, societies risk adapting to permanent instability. That adaptation quietly reshapes priorities: security over development, survival over reform, caution over hope. History shows that this kind of environment can exhaust even the most resilient populations. At the same time, the international response or lack of one matters deeply. The absence of strong public reactions from global powers does not mean indifference. It reflects a world recalculating. For the United States and its partners, the question is no longer how to guide Africa along a familiar path, but how to respond when African nations choose a different direction entirely. Pressure risks backlash. Silence risks irrelevance. Engagement carries uncertainty. What makes this moment especially important is that it is not isolated. From the Sahel to Central Africa, from visa restrictions to shifting alliances, the signals are consistent, the global order is adjusting, and Africa is no longer a passive participant in that process. The choices made now by African leaders and by international actors will shape the next decade of stability or fragmentation. For viewers watching from afar, especially those in the United States who have seen cycles of global tension come and go, this story deserves attention precisely because it is unresolved. It reminds us that headlines rarely capture consequences and that political decisions made in one region can echo far beyond its borders. So the question remains open not just for Burkina Faso, but for the world. Is President Ibrahim Traoré's path a necessary break from a failed past, or does it risk pushing his country closer to permanent crisis? Can Africa chart an independent future without becoming a battlefield of competing interests once again? If you believe this story is more complex than the headlines suggest, please share this video so others can see it too. Subscribe if you think understanding Africa's choices is essential to understanding our shared global future. And most importantly, leave a comment below. Do you see this moment as a turning point or a warning sign we should have recognized earlier?